We're going to be starting now with our next speaker, who is Rebekah Brown, and she's the head of threat intelligence at Rapid7. In information security, we constantly see organizations struggle with the security of their data and of their systems, and often without learning from their mistakes. So Rebekah will be presenting on how to leverage threat intelligence to be actionable and answer the critical questions. She's going to discuss how to avoid repeating those mistakes, how to understand why an attacker is targeting you, why they're successful in their operations, and how to prevent attacks in the future.
So thank you. I think what Saher forgot to mention was that I'm going to try and tell you how to try to do all of those things. It's no guarantee that it's going to work, but it's some research we've been working on to try and understand, even when we have really good answers to questions, why people don't always act. So I'm Rebekah Brown. I'm the head of threat intelligence at Rapid7. I have been doing threat intelligence for a long time, probably since I first realized it was a thing. It's been probably my favorite aspect of security and information security that I've come across, which is why I keep doing it. I have an analytic mindset. I love why questions. I love answering, why does this happen, or why are things this way, which is really good because I have 3 kids, and if anyone here has kids, they know I get lots of why questions. Some recent ones I got were, why does the butter disappear on my toast when it's hot? I've gotten, why can't I climb up the wall like Spider-Man? And why can't I have a flamethrower? And the good thing about answering why questions is you really get to establish the limits of your own knowledge. When I'm trying to explain, saturated fats and room temperature versus, 80 degrees, I can figure out where my knowledge ends and where I need to get more information to answer those questions. I've always loved answering questions like this, and it probably came from the very first time I had to answer a why question in a significant way to my career, which was this question: why are you here? And it was my first day at a job in the Marine Corps cyber unit. So not actually the best question to be asked on that day. I was a Chinese crypto analyst. I was an intelligence analyst. I've been doing it for a lot of years. I thought I was pretty good at my job. And they said, we're sending you to a cyber unit. The Marines do weird things like that all the time, so I didn't think too much of it. I went through all my required training classes and Security Plus and Network Plus and Linux Plus administration. That was a fun one. And I showed up for my new job. And they literally looked at me and looked at my resume and said, why are you here? And I said, wow, I was kind of hoping you would tell me. Nobody really knew. So I went on with my job, and it was really hard at the beginning to try and figure out what my role was, where I fit in, what they really needed me for. But after a lot of time working kind of side by side with a lot of these more traditional security analysts, malware analysts, reverse engineers, forensics experts, I came back to my boss and I said, I know the answer, I know why. And he said, that's great, what is it? And I said, you need to know why. All these analysts, all these network security folks, they're really good at the what. They can tell you what happened. They can replicate an attack. They can tell you how this malware moved across the system and what it was designed to do. They can't tell you why a system was targeted versus another one. They can't tell you why sometimes when they wipe a machine, the adversary comes back, and sometimes they don't. You need me, you need an intelligence analyst to tell you the why. And my boss said, that's great, why don't you go do that? We're really warm and fuzzy in the Marines. But what I discovered, again, answering my why question of why I was there, was that we were trying to do threat intelligence. And the way I define threat intelligence is information about an adversary's intent, capability, and opportunity. So we want to understand not just what tools they're going to use or what vulnerabilities they're going to exploit, but why. Why are they going to target one organization and not another? Why are they going to wait for a specific time? Why do some remediation techniques work and others don't? Because the goal of threat intelligence is to help people make decisions at all different levels. It can be an algorithm making a decision based on a threat feed about whether it blocks a particular type of traffic or not. It can be a CISO deciding how they're going to allocate their security budget for the next 5 years. But threat intelligence and the understanding of the adversary, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, that is going to help inform those decisions so they can move forward in a rational way, again, in an ideal world. And so threat intelligence is the result of analysis. in order to get those information, in order to answer those questions and get those serious why questions, you have to go through an analytic process, which looks something like this. It really doesn't. I just tried really, really hard to put analysis on one slide, and this is what I came up with. But it's a similar process that a lot of people go through when they answer what questions. But with what questions, you have a lot more concrete evidence to go off of. When you're trying to answer why questions, a lot of it has to be inferred. A lot of it is a lot of the research that Kim talked about this morning having to do with trying to understand why would a nation state leverage so many 0 days against one particular target? You know, why would they do it during this time? So you have your question, you have what you're trying to figure out, and you start gathering all of this information. And once you've looked at the information, you come up with a hypothesis. And this is what you think is going to answer your question. Now, in the scientific method, and with a lot of the what questions, you would then do some testing and some experimentation and find out whether or not it's right or wrong. Unfortunately, with analysis and with these more complex questions, we can't do those types of testing. So we have to rely on something called analytic judgment, which means you look at all this evidence you gathered, you look at your hypothesis, and you see whether or not it fits. You also have to challenge your assumptions and say, why do I think it fits? Is it because of any sort of preconceived bias I have? Is it because I was trained or taught to think in a certain way that might not be applicable in this situation? And once you've gone through this whole process, you come up with one of two scenarios. Either your hypothesis is likely, and you were right, and that's great, and you go ahead and make your confidence assessment of how likely. Are you 90%? It's really hard to get to 90%. Or are you just 50%? Nothing is going against it, but you don't have a really strong feeling, and you record your findings. Now, the other outcome of this process could be that it's not likely, that your hypothesis was wrong, and that's totally okay. In fact, when you're going through this process, you should be wrong sometimes, because if you're always right, you're probably missing a step here when you're looking at evaluating your assumptions, because we're not always right. And if your hypothesis isn't likely, that's fine. Record your findings again so you don't go through that same process again and forget that you came up with the same conclusion. And go back through and try and develop a new hypothesis based off of what you're looking at. So this is a long process. It takes a while. It usually takes multiple people. It's hard for an individual to go through this process on their own when they're answering big questions. But people are getting really good at it. We've been doing this for a long time. In pure intelligence work, in traditional intelligence work, they've been doing it for probably centuries. In cyber threat intelligence, maybe about 10 years, but that's enough time for people to actually get really good and to start generating some good answers to these complicated questions of why do adversaries do certain things, and why do we need to make changes to protect our networks. So it's very surprising to me when I turn on the news or pull up my Twitter feed and see nothing but breach after breach after breach. We're getting so much better at understanding what adversaries are doing. We're getting good at understanding why. So why are we not seeing any change in their success rates? And by trying to think through this problem, I ran into a quote from Cliff Stoll. Cliff Stoll is the author of The Cuckoo's Egg, which was a book talking about the very first case of documented case of cyber espionage and his quest to try and understand what was going on and get people to act. And he took so many notes. Like, he had his logbook where anytime this attacker logged into his system, he would write down everything that they did. He knew every system they tried to authenticate to. He knew all the types of data and files they were looking for. But his problem that he ran into was, even though he had all these answers, no one was doing anything. No one was acting. Nothing was changing. And the conclusion he came to was, I thought I could just show people the data. I could just say, look at this command line output, and that they would know what to do with it, and they would know what was important. But it's not true. You have to tell a story. And that's why he wrote The Cuckoo's Egg, was to tell the story of this case. And so I started thinking about this, and is that our problem in information security? We just want to show people the data? We value data so much. We value our analysis so much. But is it enough just to have good analysis and to show it to people? Or do we need to tell a story? And if we need to tell a story, what kind of story? What is going to actually reach people? What elements? What do we need to focus on? How do we need to approach our audience? So I ended up with more questions than I had answers. But again, I'm an analyst, so that made me really happy. It was a good day. And so I started saying, okay, what do I need to do to find out how to tell this story in a way where all of these good analytic findings and conclusions that we're coming to can reach the audience in a way that they actually act and can change. And so I started looking at behavioral psychology. Behavioral psychology, they've done a lot of research into what causes people to change, what causes them to change their behaviors, and what actually are blockers for changing behaviors. And what they found through a lot of their research is that there are 5 different steps in this process. The first is pre-contemplation, where you don't know there's a problem. You don't know you need to change. You don't know what's going on. The next phase is contemplation, where you are now aware that there's a problem, and now you need to figure out what you need to do about it. Then there's determination, where you decide what change needs to be made, what actions you need to take. Hopefully it's positive ones. And then action. And then after action, though, there's maintenance. Because as a lot of these studies looked at things like lifestyle changes, people quitting smoking, starting to exercise, better eating habits, and things like that. That's very similar to network security, where it's not one and done. You can't say like, hey, I don't know, I swear we patched last week. Like, I think we're good. You have to continue this behavior. You have to continue the positive change. You have to maintain it. So thinking about information security, what are we really, really good at from this list? We're really good at getting people from pre-contemplation to contemplation. We are so good at pointing out problems. We will point out all the problems people have in their networks. It makes most people really happy. But there are a lot more phases after that. And so if all we're doing is saying, hey, wake up. Like, this internet is great and it's supporting a lot of things, but there's a lot of risks associated with it. And we have to make changes and we have to do something to make it better. Good luck with that. And then we move on to something else. That could be one of the reasons we're not actually seeing change despite having good information and good data. So if we want to focus not just on that pre-contemplation to contemplation, but how to actually get to action and how to get at that point to maintenance, to get people to continue to make good decisions and prioritize security, we need to change some of the way that we're approaching things. So looking back at this behavioral psychology research, I looked at what gets people to act in other scenarios outside of information security. What gets people to make those positive decisions in that determination phase and move on to action? And the first is an emotional bond. So yeah, I see why we have problems in information security. But it is really important. When someone is going to make a decision to change their behavior, to take a different course of action than one that comes intuitively or the one that they thought previously was the right course of action, they have to trust the person who is giving them that information. They have to know that they do have their best interests in heart, that they understand their situations, that they understand the business model, that they understand that, yes, this is going to have a cost associated with it, and I understand that, and I empathize with that, but I also am still going to tell you how you need to change. The next thing that they need to have is problem actualization, which means they experience or understand a problem and its consequences. So this is the reason we see people act after they've been confirmed as breached. They have actually experienced the problem. But ideally, what we can do is get people to understand these problems prior to being breached and start to make those changes that are going to prevent that from happening. But that means we have to get them to understand the situation in the same way that they would actually experiencing it, but without having to go through the experience. This is where a lot of those why questions and a lot of being able to share our analysis at this level is going to come in handy with helping people understand the problems. The next one is clarification of meaning they understand the whole situation. They understand how it fits into the bigger picture, this thing that there might be a breach or they might lose data or that there could be even more significant consequences when we talk about critical infrastructure or medical devices and things like that. So being able to convey information at that level to articulate the problem, make sure people understand the problem, and understand how it fits into their world or what's going to help somebody act. Just pointing out problems is not going to get us here. That's not anywhere on this list. We're moving on further down the stages. But then, we still want people to maintain these changes as well. If we didn't have to worry about the maintenance phase, then we could just wait for everyone to inevitably be breached and experience it themselves and have that knee-jerk reaction and change. But what we've seen, and anyone who's worked in incident response sees, is there's that initial change, there's that initial action, and we need to change. But then it fades from your memory. And if you don't keep up any sort of best practices, you don't have a maintenance plan, you're going to fall back into the same patterns and the same habits, and it's going to happen again. I've seen it time and time again when I'm dealing with incidents. Does anybody here do incident response? So we love those third, fourth time repeat customers who keep calling, and you're like, I can fix this for you, but we just did this 2 months ago. Are you like? It's because we aren't giving them the tools they need to maintain that change. Again, some of it's them, some of it's us. So some tools that we've learned from other areas aside from InfoSec are things like resource activation. We have to make sure people have the resources they need to implement changes. And that doesn't just mean sell them more products, although sometimes that's what they need. But they need to understand what they have available in their own organization to implement changes and to protect things. If it is a problem with patching and they have everything in place to patch, they just don't have a good process or a good system or their team doesn't understand or prioritize, then that's something that they already have on hand that can be utilized as a resource to support this change. The next thing is mastery. So they need to be able to get very good at utilizing these resources and utilizing these tools. They need positive feedback. So this is an area where metrics are brilliant. People hate metrics because a lot of times they're meaningless, and no one really knows what they're trying to convey, and they're so easy to manipulate and fudge that sometimes they don't even mean anything. But this is a really good place where you can start to implement some metrics to say, okay, let's see how we're doing. If we're making progress and those metrics are showing us that, yes, we had this problem, but we made a change and we're better, that is going to positively reinforce and keep people to continue down that path of positive change. If it says, hey, we were doing good, but we've taken a dip and we're no longer on that right track, you can course correct more quickly if you're tracking it and you're able to identify these things. And then collaboration is the last aspect that they found is helpful. Working with other teams, working with partners, knowing that they're not alone. Getting security teams internally to talk to each other can be hard, but it's one of those things that is going to help support those changes and keep up those positive behavioral changes or positive security changes in the long run. So after doing this research and saying, okay, these seem to be things that we could better utilize, that could have positive results in the way we handle sharing information and working with organizations to secure themselves, I wanted to look over some examples of what I thought were good examples of information security and see if any of these elements were present. So the first one I looked at was actually one of my favorite incidents and awareness campaigns I worked on. This was a barracks web interface attack. So this happened way back in 2017, which is like 6,000 breaches ago, so everyone might not remember it. But this was a situation where radio stations, like small radio stations, churches, colleges, community-owned radio stations, their broadcasts were hijacked and they started playing these really offensive anti-Donald Trump songs. I don't know why anybody would do that, but someone did. And so it first hit the media that this was happening. There was a lot of kind of pandemonium at first with people being like, how could this happen? What vulnerability, what did they exploit? And then people saying, well, what could happen next? Today it's offensive music. Tomorrow they could be putting out false information about emergencies and telling people to evacuate and clogging roads. And all of these were actual scenarios that could possibly happen. Especially in 2017, we were kind of in the height of some misinformation campaigns going on. So it is likely that somebody could have used a similar tactic to do much more damage. So my team said, okay, well, let's see how we can understand what's going on and help people. So we looked at the devices that were being compromised, and what we found was there was no, mysterious 0-day, there was no elite hacking going on. A lot of these devices had been set up directly on the internet with no authentication. So you could browse to the web interface, and it would say, like, where do you want your audio import source to come from? And you could just change it. It was not that complicated for us, for information security professionals. For these radio stations who probably had it set up 10 years ago and nobody really knew it, so don't touch it because we don't want to break anything, it was a really complicated problem because they didn't know how to protect themselves. So we use some of our, Rapid7 does Project Sonar, which is an internet scanning project. Well, we went through all of our sonar data. We looked for these fingerprints of these devices. We did a banner grab to see which ones looked like they were not requiring authentication. We compiled a list, and we did a write-up of the scenario and what happened, what some of the potential, why, what else could happen if we didn't fix something. And then we went a step-by-step tutorial of how to go to your own portal, click here, set up a password, make sure you remember your password, but at least do some authentication so nobody can just go and do this again. And we worked with some of our government contacts to reach out and share this information with a lot of the radio stations. And so what we saw was when we did our first scans for exposure, we saw 220 devices that were set up on the internet with no authentication. After kind of the initial knee-jerk giving them that what information, that, hey, something bad is happening, maybe you should do something, we saw 15% kind of remediate and put up some authentication. But then after we did our kind of big push of outreach, where we provided a lot more information, we provided those step-by-step tutorials, and sent it out through trusted partners, we actually saw a 70% decrease in exposure, which isn't perfect, but for a 3-week period, that is really, really good. And so I went back and looked at that and said, okay, what happened here that were some of these positive traits that we were looking at for behavioral change? So first of all, we explained what the problem was and we gave examples. So we had the problem actualization. We talked about how it fit in the big picture and what could happen if nobody secured it, and how things now that adversaries were aware that this was possible, how they're likely to see more attacks. So at that point, we were giving them more information about the situation as well. We gave kind of the step-by-step guidance, and we offered follow-up support. So we were providing tools for maintenance as well. Now, for emotional bonding, that was not intentional, but turns out when our government partners sent the information out, they included my cell phone. And so I got lots of calls over the next 2 weeks from people who were concerned, they got this memo and wanted to know what to do. There was a lot of emotional bonding going on now, and I don't recommend doing that in every scenario. But again, it's an important element. People knowing that if they have concerns, if they have questions, that somebody will listen to them and talk to them, and we did see change. A second area where I've seen a lot of positive action recently is in exposure management. Not across the board. I know asset management and keeping track of what people have on the internet is an ever-ending task. But in certain situations where we're trying to limit exposure for certain critical vulnerabilities, things like making sure that another WannaCry doesn't spread as quickly, we have seen positive results. And in this, the approach that we were taking was to kind of take that attacker's eye view and say, okay, what would an adversary see about your organization? Are you exposing these ports that we've seen them taking advantage of? Do you have these vulnerabilities publicly exposed that we know adversaries are exploiting? How easy are they to exploit? What would happen if they were able to compromise your networks using this? And then we would kind of map it out in a kill chain format. So those of you who aren't familiar with the kill chain is just a way of kind of visually representing the temporal aspect of an attack. So everything an attacker would have to do, from reconnaissance to actually delivering an exploit or being able to compromise your system, if they're going to install malware, and then whatever follow-on actions. It's just a good way of kind of mapping out the steps that it takes. And so we could pinpoint and we could say, yes, you have these exposures. And so right here at the exploitation phase, your system could be compromised if it hasn't already been. And we're seeing active exploitation. And we're seeing it target other organizations like you. So this exposure that you have right here is going to impact you. And that means that down the road, you're going to see the potential for a loss of X amount of money, or X amount of downtime, or business operations. These are all figures and facts that you can get by going through that structured analytic process, by asking those questions and doing your research and coming up with the answers. But now we're presenting it in a way where we are helping with that problem actualization as well. So again, what are we seeing here? The input's based off of actual intelligence and not just hype. A lot of times when we go through and we talk about these exposures, we talk about these celebrity vulnerabilities that are out there, the answer it comes down to is this isn't going to impact you. Follow your normal patching procedures, do your testing, you have time. And so when the situation comes where you say, okay, you know what, this is a big deal and you need to act, and here's why, and here's the impact it's going to have on you, people are far more likely to listen and they're far more likely to act. Again, clear examples of the changes that need to be made and the specific impacts that they're going to have. So this is an area, I think, exposure reduction, where we can start having doing even more of these tactics to help people understand why they need to change, but I think we're in a good place there. And so if this is something that's actually going to be useful, and we can start leveraging some of these tactics to make changes, whether it's at your own organization, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a security researcher and you just want to be able to share your findings and have someone listen to you, what are the tools and how do you do this? So the good thing is a lot of the information already exists. You don't have to go do a whole lot of additional analysis because, like I said, we're doing a lot of really good analysis. We're understanding adversaries. We're understanding what they're targeting and why and how they're operating. We just have to convey it in a different way so that we're supporting all these things that the customers, the people we need to change, can understand us. So there's technical and non-technical things. Things like problem actualization and clarification of meaning. Those can come from things like your incident analysis or analysis you've done of external incidents or things that are in the news and other things people have seen. We have that data. Your resource activation, those comes from understanding of security tools and what you have access to now and maybe what changes you need to implement in the future moving forward. But then the non-technical resources, things like that emotional bond, it's actually not as hard and not as scary as one might think. If you go into it saying, you know what, this is my internet too and I want it to be a good place, you're going to go out trying to support someone rather than blaming them for not knowing everything about security that you do. It's just a subtle mindset, but the people you're talking to will notice. Mastery, you want to make sure that the changes work. You want to make sure that the suggestions you've given somebody are actually achieving the consequences or achieving the results that you thought. And then provide that feedback. If they don't know how to measure, if they don't know what good looks like, work with them and help them on that. Again, metrics are a really good place to demonstrate progress in this area. And then collaboration. A lot of skills and a lot of different teams are needed to bring some of these big changes to fruition, especially things like architecture changes or policy changes. And so making sure that you aren't trying to do everything yourself, get over our hero complex that a lot of people have and go out and work with other people, that's what's going to make this a sustainable change in the long run. And so that is kind of my initial research. Like I said, so far in what I've looked at, it looks like these are actual good ways that we can help people change. They're going to require changes in us. It's going to require a lot of work, but I'm hoping that in the end, what we can end up with is a way to take all of this wonderful work, this wonderful research that we're doing, and actually find ways to make it applicable, and again, make the internet a better place for everyone. So that's all I have, and I think we have some time for questions. They're coming around with mics.
Hi, my name's Emma and I work system safety in a national transport body, and I'm here because I don't know much about cybersecurity and we're being asked to do joint system safety and cybersecurity assessments. But first I want to say you've made me very, very happy because I've been running around with the change cycle for the past 6 months. I can now go back and say a Marine from the cybercrime unit is using exactly it. You've given me great credibility. So my question is, how did you get over that initial hurdle when you're running around with the psychology research? How did you get them to apply the change cycle to get them to make it stick so you could start to implement it?
So demonstrating, like I said, when I went back and I pointed at successful examples like our barracks research and could say this is why it worked. We didn't know it at the time, but these are the things we did. And then I can look at other examples that maybe weren't as successful. Unfortunately, not all of the research we do is well received or adopted, and say, let's see where we went wrong. Let's see how we handled these situations differently and how we had such drastically different outcomes. That was very beneficial. For me personally, and where I work, I like pulling wacky research from other places all the time. And so it wasn't out of the normal that I was like, hey guys, I got this psychology journal. But getting people into the mindset that sometimes security problems have solutions that are outside the security realm and that we can pull from existing research that people have done to make our solutions better. That's a mindset that I'm fortunate that the people I work with have adopted, and I hope it gets adopted more widely in general.
One of the points that you made on mastery was that it's important that we provide people with tools to be able to master the things that we want them to. So given the pace of change, how do you, stay on top of it? Because mastery requires some degree of consistency so you get good at it. And so just when people get good at it, and it's something they can now forget about, we come up with something else and go, and now it's changed, you need to do it again. So how do you keep people engaged past to keep on getting good at it?
So it depends on the situation. But a lot of times, making sure that you are aware of the dependencies and aware of how people are leveraging tools and what they're using them for, that way when you start making changes, either to processes or policies, you understand what the impacts are going to be, and you can address those ahead of time. I know that's an ideal world, and it won't always happen that way. So if you do make a change and it breaks somebody's solution or breaks their process, then being able to address that quickly and making sure that, again, that's where the collaboration comes in hand. You haven't handed something off. You haven't been like, good luck with this, you're on your own. You have those metrics to provide the feedback. You have the collaboration, so you're going to find out very quickly if something's no longer working, and then you can, at that point, address it. But it is, and mastery is, I think mastery is one of those areas where we're going to have to kind of tweak it for cybersecurity as we do for other types of behavioral changes. But understanding that it can be done, that security is doable, is really important, and knowing what tools they have, or tools are available, and how to implement those are a very important step in the process. Are we good? All right, I'm going to be around, I guess probably until everybody else leaves. So if you have any other questions, feel free to find me afterwards, and thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Rebekah, for a brilliant presentation filled with great recommendations as well. And of course, as a threat intelligence analyst, I loved it because it made my job sound really cool. So thanks for that. Next up, we have our final speaker, Andrea Berger. Andrea is a senior research associate at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, where she specializes in North Korea sanctions and counterproliferation. It's pretty cool. Today, Andrea will be talking about the specific case of the North Korean IT sector and how companies and services tie into cyber strategy.
Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. I feel like an absolute imposter in your midst because I am not a cybersecurity expert, and you'll be able to tell that super quickly. I'm a North Korea specialist by background and a Canadian North Korea specialist, which is even worse, and I've therefore this week been the brunt of like every Trump foreign policy joke. But my colleagues and I at the Middlebury Institute have been doing a piece of research that we find really fun. In general, a lot of our work looks at illicit networks, and we kind of try to keep on top of what is North Korea doing overseas, what sort of arms trading does it engage in, what other forms of sanctions evasion activity, and we do that using a quite wide range of open sources. And as we were doing that research, we actually started to pick up on the fact that there was a pretty significant North Korean presence in the global commercial IT sector. That was not really a subject of discussion. It wasn't really a discussion when we talk about North Korean cybersecurity issues, which focus a lot on the kind of hacking, malware, threats, and offensive operations that they do in cyberspace. And it wasn't a focus of the discussion on the sanctions evasion or illicit activity front either, really. So we wanted to pull together some of the things that we were seeing in a piece of research. So that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. But before I do that, I just want to zoom out a little bit and talk about North Korean cyber strategy and actually where that fits into their thinking as a whole. And I've pulled a quote here from a pretty prominent North Korean defector called Jung Se-yeol. He trained quite a number of North Korean hackers, IT specialists, software developers, and since his defection has been talking about the role that different parts of these specialists sort of play in national strategy. And so he calls North Korean activity in cyberspace the secret war. And that dovetails really well on broader North Korean strategy, because a key strategic principle for North Korea is always to fight asymmetric. That's what has governed a lot of its thinking basically since the creation of the North Korean state. In the Korean War period, they fought asymmetric by building tunnels. Nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction today play that same role for them in the context of their capabilities versus their adversaries, and cyber does as well. And so it's very much part of that big package thinking. For North Korea, particularly in the cyber domain, their activity here presents a low cost and a relatively low risk opportunity to do a number of things. I've put a short list there, but there are definitely other things. So disruption of adversary activities and capabilities, power projection, coercion, intelligence collection, and revenue generation. But I would actually put those and repackage them in three kind of general buckets. The first one is offensive operations. The second one is kind of the intelligence collection, exfiltration of data part. And then there's the campaigns to generate revenue. And there can be a meshing of those things or an intersection of those things at various points in time, but they, I think, characterize the general North Korean activity in this space. So how does North Korean presence in the global commercial IT sector fit into this, or does it even at all? Are they completely separate things where North Korean software providers building things like games or websites or VPNs, are they in a totally different bubble than the guys that are doing kind of the offensive operations, cybercrime for revenue generation thing? And it's probably tempting to conclude that they are, but actually one of the things we found over the course of our research was that the organizations in North Korea that are responsible for the offensive operations, exfiltration of data, the revenue generation through cybercrime, those guys are also involved in the commercial IT sector. And I'll show you a good example in a moment. But there is an overlap here in terms of the organizations running these different spheres of activity. So what, in a general sense, what did we start to notice when we did our network research? The first thing was that we saw North Koreans going overseas and embedding quite a bit in foreign IT companies or in the IT departments of foreign companies. So to give you one prominent example, last year, if you'll remember in the news, North Korea had the brother of Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-nam, assassinated in the Kuala Lumpur airport. One of the individuals that was involved in that attack was in Malaysia because he had gotten a visa to embed in the IT department of a Malaysian company. One example, but there are many of them. And this is not actually something that is specific to the IT sector for North Korea. They do that kind of embedding system with a number of other sectors, from maritime to anything else. But we also started to see that companies, general North Korean trading companies operating overseas, and there are a lot of them. They do general import-export, or that's how they brand themselves. In some countries, they might have more of a specialization than in others. But in quite a number of cases, we started to see companies that had not previously had anything to do with IT or not previously advertised anything to do with IT suddenly start advertising their ability to offer IT products and services. So as an example, in Bangladesh, there is a North Korean company that for quite some time has been involved in granite mining and general trade, and it has now started advertising that it can give customers around the world things in the IT space as well. Kind of strange. So we started pulling on things when we were doing our investigations and following these rabbit holes, and found a lot. I'm going to focus on two networks quickly in this presentation, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So the first is the Korea Apragang Technology Development Company, or KATDC. Apragang means Yalu River. It's a large trading conglomerate, and you'll see a lot of other companies in North Korea called Aprokgang as well for the same reason. But KATDC plays a fairly central role, from as much as we can tell, in the North Korean IT sector, and specifically in operations overseas. A North Korean business publication says that the company has led the IT industry in North Korea since the 1990s, and it has a specialization in biometric identification and IT security products in particular, and software for security applications. So that's kind of its main area of specialization. The company won gold medals at the International Exhibitions Fair in Geneva, International Exhibition of Inventions in Geneva, on several occasions, and advertises that pretty widely, which is kind of interesting. It has from our research, we found that it has a fairly wide geographic reach as well, a good presence in China, presence in a number of Southeast Asian countries, Russia, Africa. And this, a company called PFIS, is one of their presences in China, or was until very recently. The company that is behind this website has recently been shuttered by the Chinese authorities, though the website still remains active, as do some of the other marketing, including a Chinese commerce page for these guys. So they're quite interesting. They're owned by Aprokgang, and as you can see, they are selling biometric identification products. In particular, their specialization here is fingerprint and palm print scanners. They will sell you both the hardware as well as software, and as I'll get to in a second, apparently algorithms. They claim to be the first company that developed a fingerprint lock for the Chinese marketplace, but we also found them outfitting parts of the Nigerian civil service with their fingerprint scanners. So they have sold products to a fairly diverse marketplace. The interesting thing that we observed that we didn't expect to was they flagged the algorithms piece. Some of the links off of the PFIS site led us to reputable, as far as we can tell, foreign companies. And when we looked at those companies, we thought, okay, are they North Korean controlled front companies, actually? And our conclusion was that no, they're not. But when you start to look at some of the products and the product advertisements for these companies, you got things like this really often. So here is a Chinese-made fingerprint scanner from a reputable, large Chinese company that sells globally. And if you look on B2B websites marketing these products, they are often marketed by saying new version of North Korean algorithms with dependability and accuracy. And so that comes up over and over again. Another example is here, right? Same thing, again, different company, different supplier of that product using North Korean algorithms. We assume from PFIS, but that's not something we can prove. The link was established via the PFIS website, so there's good circumstantial evidence here, but question mark. These are only two examples. We found dozens in multiple languages in completely different parts of the world. Sometimes they say just Korean algorithms. Sometimes they use just the specific phrasing that the North Koreans often do to describe their biometric identification products. But a pretty clear trend, and again, a wide marketplace. We don't know who Aprokgang's masters, so to speak, are in North Korea, so where they report to in the system and what that means for the type of objectives they might have. Is this straightforward revenue generation for them? I think that's an open question that we have. So that's case example one. Example two are these guys. This is Glocom. Glocom made headlines last year, actually around the same time that Kim Jong-nam was assassinated in Malaysia, because it was like Malaysia's perfect storm in terms of North Korean illicit activity. Glocom is a arms-dealing firm that is run by the North Koreans, specifically by North Korea's Foreign Intelligence Agency. And they deployed someone to Malaysia, a North Korean intelligence agent. He set up a network of companies around him, a number of front companies, as well as that website, and was marketing military products, specifically military communications products, internationally at major defense fairs, in major military industrial publications, pretending to be a Malaysian company, and got pretty far, sold things to quite a number of countries and foreign armed forces who may have known it was North Korean, who may not have. But when I was helping Reuters with this investigation, we started to see that Glocom in that network of companies had IT companies. They were completely separate from the arms trading business that seemed to be the kind of core activity that this network was carrying out. But there was several IT companies. One of them remains active and has the North Korean intelligence agent as a shareholder on the paperwork still, so the Malaysian authorities have not closed that company. But the other one, which I'll show you in a second, closed down, but gives you a good picture of what these guys were up to. Glocom, again, is run by the RGB, which is North Korea's foreign intelligence agency. They're the guys that do assassinations and commando raids, but also are sort of credited with the 2014 Sony Pictures hack, as well as a number of other cyber operations. They have several cyber subunits within them. They do things that are from all three of those buckets I described. And the reason for that is in kind of the 2010 period, they amalgamated cyber units from a whole bunch of different parts of the North Korean system under one roof in the Foreign Intelligence Agency. And so they're doing all of that in that shop. There's another agency, which I won't dwell on too much, that also does things in cyberspace. But these are the guys that are running that as well. And they're obviously doing arms trading and some of this stuff in the commercial IT sector. So that's AdNet. That's one of the companies that was run by this North Korean intelligence agent. And as you can see, it was doing a range of things, web development, app development, games. Again, you get the biometric identification stuff, fingerprint scanning, facial recognition software, security products, VPNs, encryption technologies, full like business suites for companies, USB security keys. What else did I miss? A whole bunch of things. And its products were on sale in China, Japan, Malaysia, India, Pakistan, Thailand, UAE, the UK, Germany, France, Canada, Argentina, and Nigeria. So again, large marketplace, North Korean technology going to quite a diverse set of countries. The developers are interesting. So here, on paper, this company is a small enterprise, had only a handful of staff, but claims to have over 500 talented technicians. And social media profiles attached to some of the people who claim to work for AdNet also give the indication that they basically might have just been the channel for contracting. So where people were basically coming here, but then the contracts were being passed on to this other group of technicians, who knows where. Maybe they're in North Korea, maybe they're not, maybe they're in China. But one of the Korean-speaking individuals who claimed to work at AdNet said, I can provide a lot of IT technicians, as many as you want if you want. If you hire them, you'll never be disappointed and you'll become a millionaire, which I thought was great. And we suspect that to be a wider pattern, that actually these entities and these presences overseas are being used as a contract vehicle to generate leads, but then pass on that business back to others. Glocom's website as well shared some web infrastructure with a single other company called Future Tech Group. And Future Tech Group, when we had a look at them the first time, there was a couple pieces of web infrastructure that were shared, but we didn't really know if that was a conclusive indication that these guys were North Korean. You looked at the website, and it was pretty bland. They didn't actually advertise an address anywhere or much about them, but then a few red flags started to crop up for us, and this is where, if you've worked on North Korea investigations long enough, those red flags came much quicker. So for example, they advertised Korean machine translation software, but also, despite the fact that everything else in their portfolio was IT focused, they also advertised irrigation systems for mushroom growing. mushroom growing is a big thing in North Korea. If you enjoy photos of Kim Jong-un looking at things, Kim Jong-un looking at photos of the mushroom farms are like up there with the best things. Mushroom farming was on there, but then also the marketing video for the company, which was the big kind of indicator for us. The marketing video for the company used as the background music the version of the Rocky theme tune that North Korea's girl band, the Moranbong band, it's like their Spice Girls, performed for Kim Jong-un in 2012. So that was the music on top of the video. And if you've heard it, it's really distinctive. And so as soon as we started playing that, we're like, hey, this is probably a North Korean front company. The interesting part of this is that Future Tech Group claims to have won a recent major international prize for its facial recognition software for law enforcement. And I won't go into too many details on this because actually my colleagues and I took a decision that in this case, a company, a defense firm in a US allied country had inadvertently contracted to these guys, resulted in them winning this prize, probably without the knowledge that they were at all North Korean. And so we don't want to destroy their lives, and so don't want to do a naming and shaming exercise here. But when you looked at that prize and the competition, they did award something to facial recognition software for law enforcement. It was not an entry from a North Korean company, unlike the ones for Apportgang. It was an entry from a defense firm in a US allied country. And when you started to look at it further, there's Korean-looking individuals on the marketing videos and on the product demonstrations and things, and it seems pretty likely that this is what has happened, that firm contracted inadvertently to Future Tech Group, and those guys then won a big prize, and it then got integrated into foreign law enforcement in a US allied country, which is not great. So how did that happen? We only have suspicions about this and can't confirm anything. So here's some of their stuff about, this is their product brochure for facial recognition software, but they've got a whole bunch of additional details on here. We think this probably happened in this way. The use of freelancer profiles. And this is, in general, a trend we saw across a lot of the networks we looked at. You would see the pretty heavy use of various freelancer profiles, some of them we think falsified or fake identities, basically, to do the lead generation. So here is the one we think is probably linked to Future Tech Group. We don't think that person is a real person, though we can't be sure. The images that he had on his freelancer profile are the exact same ones on the Future Tech Group website, in addition to a number of other things like the various claims and whatnot. And so we suspect that's probably how a lot of these relationships got formed, and there were hundreds of contracts across the companies we looked at where this had clearly been used as a mechanism for lead generation. And you would have an awarding of a contract for $10, and then the discussion would move, presumably, offline to fill a larger order. So simple evasive tactics, replicated on a large scale, really difficult to tell if you're the potential customer here that these guys might be North Korean, because these platforms rely to an extent on anonymity and a lack of existing relationship in order. It's impersonal business matchmaking, really, is what it is. And that works great if you're trying to conceal who you really are. So summary of the trends here quickly. Wide range of product and services that we saw the North Koreans offering, but an emerging specialization in IT security and biometric identification. We also saw the sale of algorithms, we think, into foreign supply chains. Again, can't be sure of that, but seems like a strong possibility. If there's any journalists and you want some good leads, go and poke around with those companies and see if our suspicions are right here, because there's potentially some interesting follow-up work to be done and follow-up research. More general IT companies are getting involved in the IT sector. What does that mean? Is that, again, just another lead generation mechanism? The seeming use of freelancer platforms, similar kind of question for us. And then my outstanding questions at a higher level are the following. Is North Korea using its commercial presence in the IT sector for strategic or tactical aims other than revenue generation? So how much of a cybersecurity risk is it basically if you contract to North Korea for some of the types of products and services we've been talking about here? And does that differ by product or service? How does that activity intersect with the seeming preference that North Korea has for targeting, at present, the private sector through hacking and malware and all that good, but much more kind of offensive operation style stuff? And do the organizations active in this space connect to one another in one part of the North Korean system or more? How do they relate, and what does that mean for the focus of their activities? So those are really questions that I haven't been able to answer yet. If anyone is keen on pursuing those questions further, I would love to talk to you more. But I'll end it there and take any questions you have, and look forward to talking to you more about this and learning from you. I've learned so much from you today, so really thank you.
Thank you very much. Is your assessment that these algorithms and the software are self-developed, or do you think it's the result of intellectual property theft?
My assumption is that it's self-developed. They've been working on this for a while, so I don't want to give you the sense that the IT sector is one that North Korea realized exists, like 2 years ago or something, and they've just jumped into it now. The prizes that they were being awarded for that fingerprint scanner, for example, were awarded in the 90s. So they have been clearly active in this space, and I think that is probably their intellectual property. For what it's worth, they actually file patents on a lot of things as well. So you can probably go look. I didn't actually check if they had a patent for some of the stuff, but.
Thank you so much. Regarding the all the different companies that you're seeing, is it clear what kind of connection they have to the North Korean government, if any? Are they proxies? Do they feed revenue back? Are they completely unconnected? Or is it like a proxy relationship where they can act on behalf of the government when called upon? Or is it just not clear what the connections are? Thank you.
I get asked this question a lot, and actually the answer probably applies quite generally to North Korean companies going overseas. North Korean companies going overseas tend to be foreign branches or arms of state trading companies. Now, that's not to say that they don't get to keep a piece of the revenue for themselves. They do. But all those companies also have to give at least a portion of their revenue back to the state. So I leave you to draw conclusions about how state-controlled or directed that makes things. Certainly, they get to use their own discretion for things. But at the same time, have some confidence that part of that revenue, at least, is going back to the state, and they probably do have a fairly strong state affiliation to part of the system. When it comes to networks like Glowcom, for example, then you've got a really strong linkage because it's clearly run by the Reconnaissance General Bureau. And so there I would give you a fairly concrete answer that if you have a North Korean intelligence agent on your paperwork, then the company is probably state-run and directed.
Hi there. In terms of the new sort of mediation going on between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, and obviously to do with the sort of whole denuclearization of the North Korea DPRK, do you think that what you're talking about today, that there are lots more implications for there to be a sort of détente between North Korea and America to help us find out what's going on here? And with regards to the capabilities of North Korea and their technological capabilities, things like our military operations in places like Afghanistan, there have been speculation that North Korea had strong affiliations with Iran, and things like WhatsApp. Recently, troops have been told that they're not allowed to use WhatsApp to any degree because it can be hacked into and then sort of compromise military operations. So do you think that with all you're talking about here today, that the new sort of relationship between America and North Korea, if it is sustained, would actually be beneficial for us to sort of hack into their sort of technological capabilities and use them to our own sort of gain?
Oh, we should have a rule in the audience that if anyone brings up the Trump-Kim summit, that I get an extra free drink at the drinks reception afterwards. So let me unpack your question into a few pieces. I think there's a question about whether or not the political rapprochement, however brief or fleeting that might be, we don't know, whether that will affect our ability to have a conversation about this. I think that's a reasonable question. So, for example, had this summit not happened, and had there been a continuing drumbeat of sanctions activity, specifically from the United States, I think you probably would have gotten to the point where there would be more sanctions on IT companies. At the moment, there's only one sanction on one IT company. And that activity is otherwise not restricted, despite its potential intersection with the cybersecurity threat from North Korea. I got the sense that that was probably going to change. In September 2017, President Trump signed an executive order that for the first time spelled out clearly an authority to take punitive action against North Korean IT companies. So there was a potential for more here, and that could have had a quite significant awareness-raising effect as well. Sanctions often do, you can talk about how they work or don't work, but one of the things they do clearly do is generate awareness about risks. And specifically, I think those exist in quite a strong way in the subsectors that North Korea is really active in, the biometric identification, specifically the fingerprint scanning, facial recognition software thing. So I suspect now that's not going to happen. Similarly, now there's probably going to be less appetite to talk about the nasty things that North Korea is doing. When I put a reminder on Twitter the other day that North Korea is still a massively active proliferator and has just been busy, equipping Myanmar with ballistic missiles, I got absolute hell rained down on me from Trump supporters, right? So the space to talk about the continuing illicit activity that North Korea engages in is probably going to shrink while we're in active engagement. Then there's a separate question about whether or not North Korea is going to continue to do some of the type of hacking operations that it's engaged in for a long time while this is ongoing. And there, I think it's an open question. I'm not sure that anyone is going to get the political room to use this as an opportunity, a window of opportunity to start acting against North Korea. I think that's really probably quite unlikely. There will be, I imagine, within the policy community in the United States, but also other countries, a definite toning down of the more oppositional and antagonistic type of behavior towards North Korea, and that applies across the board.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you. This is absolutely fascinating to listen to. Because normally when we hear about North Korea, it's all about the illicit activities, the kind of the money sent in diplomatic bags from foreign embassies and all the illegal trades that they're involved in. And this, on the face of it, looks completely legitimate, albeit the source is potentially North Korean technology and capability. If we just assume that maybe they're not inserting rogue algorithms into other countries, and this is just simply to raise foreign cash, which they're always very keen to get, what does this tell you about the kind of capabilities that exist in North Korea in the cyber space? And does this give us any indication of what of how those capabilities are used for the big dramatic kind of cyber attacks that are sometimes pointed towards North Korea? And I think about things like the Bank of Bangladesh heist, which almost certainly came from North Korea, which involved quite sophisticated capabilities. Do these companies give you an indication of the hidden capability within North Korea?
Yeah, so again, this is part of my ignorance being a non-cyber specialist, and also not having had the ability to look actually at any of the software algorithms we're talking about. So all I'm working off of is mostly North Korean claims and following the trail there. So I have to acknowledge that area of ignorance. If you want to go to one of the companies that advertises North Korean algorithms on fingerprint scanners and buy yourself a fingerprint scanner, I would be really interested to hear what you find. But there are a few general bits and pieces that at least speak to your question. North Korea and South Korea, believe it or not, there used to be a wonderful sunshine period where North Korea and South Korea cooperated on quite a lot of projects. And one of them was actually they had joint IT companies that were in China. And whenever the South Korean company managers would go to those IT firms and look at how the North Korean developers were coming along in terms of their capabilities, they would consistently report that they were impressed not only with the general level of capability for those programmers, but specifically they always said that the North Koreans outdid their South Korean counterparts in the IT security space. That was one area where they always excelled and were ahead of the South Koreans in terms of capability. So that's kind of just anecdotally one piece. In terms of how it fits into offensive cyber operations, I really don't know. And if we're working on your assumption that they're not putting anything malicious into the services and products that they're providing, then maybe there is not that much of a crossover. If I remember correctly, with some of the IT products that North Korea has in the domestic market, they have done that. So there was some interesting looks at some of the domestic consumption software and the bits about taking user data from that, for example. So I think I put the possibility out there that if they have the opportunity to maybe even use their access to a foreign marketplace for data gathering on customers, especially if they're active in and manage to get into foreign law enforcement supply chains, that would seem to me, if I were North Korea, I would really want to exploit that opportunity. I'm not North Korean, so don't take my word for it, but you never know. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrea. A brilliant talk to end the day with some interesting insights into asymmetric capability, especially those of North Korea.
So Kirsten and I just want to say a few words for our closing remarks before we wrap up the day. So we've seen a wide range of talks today on a variety of topics and all different aspects of cybersecurity. So I just wanted to run through a few takeaways. There's always a bigger picture. So whether that means there's geopolitical events influencing the cyber threat landscape, or we're talking about relationships and trust as much as we're talking about technology, as many of the talks demonstrated today, context is really important. Another takeaway is that security has a lot of dimensions and a lot of stakeholders. And so all the talks today really reminded me of that. And it's fascinating, but also quite daunting. And I was just thinking that it's experts like this who have presented today who not only have the authority to speak on these kind of matters because of their knowledge base and expertise, but also making it accessible to the public and to the industry and to people like yourselves, that kind of analysis and those recommendations. So we really have them to thank for that. And lastly, I was just thinking that we should do this more often because someone was commenting earlier today about how there's so many women in cybersecurity in this room, and they're just never seen that before. And I was thinking the same thing actually. And we've gotten nothing but positive feedback. And as one tweet put it, a conspicuous absence of egos. And I really appreciated that during the talks and the panels. So and from the feedback from everyone. So those are the things that I kind of wanted to sum up. And now we want to tell the story a little bit about how we came up with Reset, and then we will wrap it up.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about our motivations for organising the conference. I guess one of the main things for both of us is, since working in threat intelligence, we've been to various cybersecurity conferences around the world, and as I'm sure you're not that surprised, at each of them we were disappointed with the lack of diversity in the attendees as well as with the speakers.
So that was kind of strange to us because we know such brilliant women in the field, and so we were wondering why there was this misconception, and we wanted to counter it, the idea that there aren't enough women experts out there to speak at these kind of events. And in fact, we were able to pull together a list of over 100 highly qualified cybersecurity professionals in a few hours and for our own conference. So it's a myth that there's a pipeline problem with women speakers, and we just wanted to prove that.
Yeah. And then the final thing that was really important to us was to create a content-driven event. We wanted it to focus on the work of all these women, their expertise, their knowledge, their experience. We think there's definitely a place for discussions around women in STEM and how to improve diversity, but we didn't want it to be here. The highlight of this event was on the work of some brilliant cybersecurity experts.
So when we came up with the idea, we compiled that list and we pitched it to the company, and they were very supportive and receptive. So we went through kind of a consultative process and reached out to the speakers, and we ended up with more than we could even fit in a day. So there was a really positive response and a lot of encouragement.
So over this process, we've really enjoyed organising the event, and we've met and worked with some incredible individuals, and that brings us on to our thanks.
So first and foremost, big thanks goes to the speakers. These are some of the most impressive women that we know and admire, and some of them have traveled halfway across the world to be here, and all of them were amazing. So their presence here today means a lot to us, so thank you.
Next is a big thank you to everyone at BAE Systems who has been supporting us. So this goes from the marketing and comms team, who have had a great workout running around earlier from what I've seen. Also the events team, people from creative, including Kate Townsend, who worked on designing the visuals. The threat intelligence team, a lot of which are here supporting us today. And finally, Louise Fisk and Teresa Palmer, I don't know where you are, if you're here, but for supporting us from a management level and sponsoring the event.
And yeah, go ahead. I should have been clapping. And finally, we'd like to thank you, the audience, for your interest in the talks, and the speakers. We're really glad that you came today, and we hope you enjoyed the day, so thanks for attending Reset.